Hello, this video is part of the EU Horizon 2020 funded project UniSAFE. UniSAFE produces knowledge, recommendations and tools to address gender-based violence in universities and research performing organisations. The topic of this particular recording is on the experience and conditions of PhD, doctoral researchers, and those doing similar work, and it is intended for use as part of the education and training on the UniSAFE project. My name is Jeff Hearn, and I'm a senior professor in human geography in Orebro University in Sweden and part of the UniSAFE project. And as I say, this particular video is focused on doctoral researchers and those doing similar work. For example, master's thesis researchers, early postdocs, those employed as researchers, and those in what are sometimes called limbo positions between, should we say, research projects, or who are actually in non-secure situations. Now, the important thing here to stress is that the conditions under which doctoral researchers and similar researchers work can be very different and very varied, and they can, in some ways, be highly relevant for understanding the potential of gender-based violence and harassment in those situations. Now, of course, although conditions vary, they often involve working very closely with supervisors, in some countries, even just one supervisor, in other countries, 2 or 3 or occasionally 4 supervisors. They can involve working alone sometimes. They can involve very intense work over a long period of time. And they can also involve an unusual mixture of, say, very formal conditions and regulations, as well as like a more informal way of working, a kind of ambiguous kind of situation, which can, in some situations, facilitate the possibilities of gender-based violence, harassment, and similar problems. One major issue here is to what extent the researcher, the doctoral researcher or similar researchers, can actually have the ability to control their situation. Can they, for a start, actually choose the topic of their research? And this varies again. And in some disciplines, particularly perhaps more in natural science disciplines, the topic, in a sense, of their research is more a matter of what is possible within, say, a larger research team, and sometimes a very particular research topic that is effectively given to them. Similarly, to what extent do people have the ability to change their research topic is also a question. Another aspect is to what extent they can change their supervisor or supervisors if things aren't going so well, or if they feel uncomfortable, not necessarily harassed in a direct way, but if they actually feel uncomfortable, for example, sitting in a room one-to-one, discussing their work, poring over texts and so on together. And also to what extent they actually have control of the way the work is done. Now, these issues can blur sometimes into what may be experienced or actually is gender-based violence or harassment or something of the sort. In addition, there are a number of more complex questions, which is, of course, not only the relations between supervisors and supervisees, there's also the question of what is happening, should we say, between doctoral researchers who may be both colleagues, but also can be competitors in a sense, and to what extent there is some degree of unevenness or even favoritism in terms of which of those doctoral colleagues actually are promoted or whose processes are blocked, more or less. At the same time, and again, this varies a lot, perhaps by discipline and also by different country, there could be controls and complications, particularly in what are called limbo situations, in terms of how does the doctoral research, which in one sense usually is, or in a sense should be, the main priority, to what extent this, in a sense, is going on alongside other kinds of tasks which may be more or less chosen or wanted by the doctoral or similar researcher. I'm talking here about obviously teaching issues. Sometimes these can be very stressful or very demanding. They can be administrative tasks. They can be tasks in the sense that the doctoral researcher may wish to do or may feel compelled to do in the context that they're working. And balancing these things can be experienced absolutely as psychological control, pressure, violation, even harassment, and so on. Finally, just 2 points here. It concerns the question of, if you like, places and spaces. Doctoral research, like other research or similar research, like master's research, thesis work, or even research projects, takes place in certain spaces and places. These can be, say, small rooms, very intimate spaces. They can also be in conferences. They can be on field trips, laboratory work, and so on. So the actual places and spaces can also create, if you like, potentialities or possibilities for various kinds of gender-based violence or harassment, and so on. Even traveling, say, to a conference or socializing during or after a conference can be, in a sense, experienced as being very uncomfortable and potentially violating. The final thing I'll raise is a bit different and perhaps something that's very under-discussed and actually perhaps not known about by everybody, which is the procedures that exist and the regulations that exist for examination, this particularly at the doctoral level, also perhaps to some extent at the master's thesis level, are incredibly varied in different countries. So in some countries, the supervisors, the 1 or 2 or 3, are still heavily involved in the process of examination. So there's a kind of dual role, and one could actually argue sometimes a conflict of interest of actually what is going on. If one's getting on well with the supervisor, then fair enough, that's okay probably. But if there's some tension or even experience of violence or harassment, and the person is still involved in the examination process, that's certainly bad news. In other countries, it's totally off the record. It's totally out of the question to involve supervisors in the examination process. Or alternatively, supervisors can be involved in the choice or the recommendation of who are the examiners, who shouldn't be personal friends, but may be friends of the supervisors. And in some countries still, if you like, the wider group of professors who may or may not be interested at all in the topic, or maybe even hostile to the topic under examination, can be involved in the final examination process and have a big say in whether that process goes smoothly or is blocked in some way, or even whether the person actually graduates. So all of these are just some examples of different conditions under which doctoral and similar researchers work. And these, in a sense, may not involve physical violence at all. They may involve psychological controls, psychological violence and violation, even sexual harassment and so on. And they're somewhat different to the conditions, say, that exist for, say, different kinds of employees in universities and similar institutions, or similar, or somewhat different also to the situation, should we say, of first-year undergraduate students who may be working more in a sort of classroom situation along with many colleagues and peers. I hope this has been useful, and please also read the associated readings for this video, and good luck with your research.